Hi, this is John Harcher, and welcome to episode 9 of Valleys of Numenor. Season 1 of The Rings of Power is over, and it was a success. Or was it? Well, it depends on who you ask. The way the series was sold may have led to alienating some viewers rather than drawing them in. Did they hype the show the wrong way? Can we actually tell if it was a success or a failure from where we sit? And yes, this episode will finally deal with the Heart of Dixie standard. Episode 9, Tolkien Goes to Market. So was this series' first season a success? Well, if you ask Amazon, it was right from the start. According to numbers they released, the show's first weekend drew several billion minutes of watching, which resulted in their most successful show ever. All good, right? Well, if you ask Nielsen, the show lost viewership every week it was on, meaning it likely not only did not draw any new viewers in, but lost the ones they had when the show started. That's bad, right? Well, maybe not. Amazon said that after the show's last episode aired, viewership shot back up. So the two reveals drew viewers back in, we think. So let's face it, unless we're sitting there in the Amazon boardroom, we're probably never going to know the exact story. But did the show meet expectations? And were those expectations a little too high? Going back to when the show was announced back in 2017, the main thing that made the news was how much Amazon paid for it. At least $250 million was the number floating around. Then it basically went into radio silence for several years before they announced who would be working on the show and who wouldn't, namely Peter Jackson. When Patrick McKay and J.D. Payne were announced, much was made of the fact that they hadn't done any show before, let alone one of this magnitude. I suppose on the one hand, they wanted to let their work speak for itself, but it might have been nice to acknowledge that, but then come out and say that their vision for the series was so powerful and well thought out that they had no issue leaving the show in their hands. As it was, they were backed up, but not fully supported. Then 2022 would be the big push with the show premiering on September 2nd. First, the title of the show was revealed with a 1-minute promo that showed the creation of the rings and yielding the title The Rings of Power. It had already been announced the series would deal with Tolkien's Second Age, so the title made sense. And as I mentioned in the first episode, to me, it did sound like a title Tolkien would have used. The issue some people had, and it's a semantic one to be sure, is that they added Lord of the Rings into the title of the show, making the full title Lord of the Rings of Power. Kind of hitting the redundancy button on the word rings there. Kind of reminds me of the Larry Buchanan classic from the 60s, Attack of the Eye Creatures. But I get Amazon's point. They paid for the rights to use the 3 Lord of the Rings books, so they were going to let everyone know. In fact, that's all they could use. Plus, if you have access to intellectual property like that, you have to exploit it. They also made a big deal about the promo being done with practical effects and not digital, unlike another program's credits where entire cities pop up and down and appear and disappear like that. So then the marketing push began in earnest. The first major images we got from the series were a group of character pictures of their hands. Certainly kept the mystery going, but hands? Really? You could kind of tell the dwarves had little hands and the elves had better outfits for the most part. But for an audience that generally didn't know Tolkien's Second Age from Europe's Dark Ages, this wasn't exactly helpful. I mean, they knew Elrond and Galadriel from the last movies, but they wouldn't know them by their hands. Batman, Iron Man, Yoda, maybe, but not a bunch of regular elves. Then, as expected, came the Super Bowl spot. It opened with the shot of a boat sailing into Numenor, followed by the 2 hunters with antlers on their backs making their way across the New Zealand countryside, acting as Middle-earth. This was followed by shots we now know were of Galadriel making her way up the frozen waterfall, Halbrand on the raft in the storm, Arondir grabbing the arrow out of the air, shooting it back. Then the meteor coming down, Gilgalad watching, followed by a whole bunch of quick shots. To say the Super Bowl spot was met with skepticism is an understatement. Focusing on Galadriel and hobbits, or pre-hobbits in this case, didn't really give audiences a good feel of exactly what the series would be like. Or would it? Maybe it was because it focused on those things that people got upset. I know some folks in my circle complained the CGI in the frozen waterfall shot didn't look that great. But I have to be honest, when you read a book, you have images of certain things in your head about how it looked. Well, that shot looked exactly how I pictured the Children of Hurin sequence in the Silmarillion. That's how it would look. I know, different age, but the point is, it looked how I hoped it would look. So, that's me anyway. Next up was a large spread in Vanity Fair magazine. Not exactly known as a place where fantasy fans go to find their info, but this shows where Amazon was trying to target. Looking back, the article was pretty comprehensive and not really full of spin. It mentioned the fact Patrick and JD were not exactly experienced in handling a show like this, but what their intentions were and what kind of things they could or could not use. It also mentioned what a diverse cast this would be. So this was a really important point they wanted to put forward, but it wasn't the sole focus of the article. In June, there was an issue of Empire dedicated to the show. Now, this was expected. If you're some kind of pop culture blockbuster, you're going to get some kind of coverage in Empire. They had 3 different covers. One with Morpheth's Galadriel, one with Prince Durin and Disa, and one with the Harfoots. They don't have the actual articles up online, and I didn't go buy the issue because I really didn't care all that much. Figured I'd just read it online no matter what. But they have little bits and snippets up there. It was a lot of the same info as the Vanity Fair article, just in different words. But this is something you do when you're doing a project like this. In early July, we got another teaser. This one focused on introducing the landscapes. We saw the 2 light-giving trees, the far north, the southlands, the elvish cities, the mines of the dwarves. Then we got the Harfoots sneaking in there. From that point on, it focuses in on Galadriel and her fight to get anyone to listen about the coming shadow. We then get some Numenor shots, then Gilgalad's warning about how everybody's going to die, then back to quick action shots before ending with the Harfoots heading off. We're starting to get the idea that it may look very nice. It's not going to be the feel-good story of the Second Age. The next big reveal was going to be at the San Diego Comic-Con in July. There were promises of a whole panel discussion on it, as well as a new teaser trailer. Before the Comic-Con, 23 new pictures of characters finally showed up. This would give us the ability to match the hands with the faces. We got, in order they showed up on the website I'm looking at them on, it was on Deadline, Isildur, Elendil, Pharazôn, Miriel, Kemen, Arion, Galadriel, Elrond, Gilgalad, Marigold, Nori, Poppy, Sadoc, the Stranger, Gandalf, Prince Durin, Halbrand, Arondir, Disa, Celebrimbor, Theo, Largo, and Bronwyn. I think Largo's kind of out of place there. Should probably be a little earlier. Looking at the pictures, this pretty much covered all the main characters that would show up. Right before the panel, the next trailer was released. It was a very sober trailer dealing very heavily with the evil that's returning. We got to see the main places on the show, Numenor, Khazad-dûm, the Southlands. We also got a lot of Sauron, even though we never see him. Sort of. Lots of shots of the sigil, later on lots of orcs. We got a few of the action shots, but it doesn't really dwell on that. And then right at the end, after the title, we get the tease. The Balrog shows up. The panel itself sort of embodied the dichotomy that continued all the way through to the series premiere. The showrunners talked about what story they would be telling and where they'd go with it. The cast talked about how great it was to have all kind of different people acting in Middle Earth. When you're doing individual stories, that could be a point of interest. Ismael Cruz Cordova, who plays Aradir, mentioned how much he enjoyed the elves in the stories and movies, but didn't think he'd get to play one as a Black Latino, but this gave him the opportunity. The problem was there did seem to be a feeling that this aspect of the show began to overwhelm the Tolkien part of the show. The issue was always there's not a book on this part of the Middle Earth saga like The Hobbit or the three Lord of the Rings books, so people don't know the story. This would be their introduction to it. But they kind of took their eye off the ball from time to time, and it was up to showrunners McKay and Payne to keep bringing it back. A couple weeks before the show premiered, we got another 2-minute trailer. Voiceovers by Galadriel and Miriel led to a lot of character moments with some very nice landscape shots. We even got the Lifetime movie moment worked in, but the focus towards the end shifts back to Galadriel. So based on what was out there, Galadriel being the main focus of the show was certainly driven home. From there, Amazon put up advertisements everywhere. You had a preview showing up on YouTube before you watched anything. It was, of course, all over like buses and subways for those who still went to the city for things. Even put their name on their Amazon boxes when you got shipments. So the show finally premieres on September 2nd, and we went over earlier what Amazon said about the numbers and what other people said about it. There was a certain attitude that sunk in with a section of the audience that it was a disaster, especially going up against House of the Dragon on HBO. And out there in the general public, House definitely had more widespread impact on a pop culture level. Now, looking at the show strictly on its individual merits, it was certainly a mixed bag. There were some shots that looked stunningly beautiful. There were others that looked kind of cheap. Costumes were the same. Some were very ornate and very detailed. Others were kind of on the verge of cosplay, like they just got it together right before they shot the scene. Now, I thought the acting was consistently good across the board. If there was an issue on that end, I would say it was with the writing in certain episodes, but not all. The ones by Patrick and JD I'd single out as particularly good in both direct Tolkien references and overall thematic content. Okay, now to deal with the elephant in the room, let's talk about the woke issue. Having a female protagonist does not automatically make a show woke. It's when the men around her are all total morons or completely helpless that will fall into that category. Amazon's other fantasy show, Wheel of Time, would fall more into this category than I'd say Rings of Power. The opening scene of that show almost bordered on parody as a group of women wizards on horseback are chasing down a couple of men. I mean, I couldn't have written it any better if it was trying to show how this show had an agenda rather than depicting Robert Jordan's novels. I've got some future episodes written about Apple Plus's adaptation of Foundation, which we may do next year if the second season ever shows up. That show definitely has this issue. Now, for comparison's sake, I would say the show that says woke to me the most is HBO Max's And Just Like That. They took characters the audience enjoyed and related to and made them almost unrecognizable. Then they added new characters in almost like a checklist. We've got this kind, we got this, we got this, we got this, we got this. Now, my wife and I watched every single episode of Sex and the City and enjoyed it. We made it through episode 4 of the new show. She said, I don't want to watch this anymore. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. It's up to you. I don't think it was the writer's intention to make Harry and Steve the most sympathetic characters on the show, but that's what they ended up doing thanks to Evan and David's performances. They were able to be basically the same characters we knew from the old show, taking it forward and growing, whereas their wives were almost unrecognizable as the characters we knew from the other show. This drives home the key point. If you get the right actors in the right roles, you'll end up fine. Looking at the recent Star Wars trilogy, John Boyega was probably the best actor to play Finn. He is a very solid and compelling actor. But it seems the producers may have led him to believe his character would be something more, Then it didn't happen. So, somewhere along the way, the race element raised its head. Then there were the despicable things online people did to Kelly Marie Tran and then later Moses Ingram on the Obi-Wan show. I don't get this. What do you get out of it by calling people racist names online? What is wrong with you people? If you don't like a character or performance, that's fine. I had kind of issues with the Reva character on the Obi-Wan show. I actually thought it should have been a young English guy. I kept hearing that in my head instead of her. But what is with all the racist stuff? The same thing with Rings of Power. There was some elements of racist online activity, and it's totally uncalled for. Now, they did make it seem overwhelming, and I think that was a bit of an overstatement. Like every single thing about somebody wrote about the show was racist, and I don't think that was the case. But it did exist. This leads into what I teased early on as the Heart of Dixie scale. What, pray tell, is this? To get everybody up to speed, Heart of Dixie was a show on the CW in the early 2010s starring Rachel Bilson after the OC ended on Fox. It had a number of younger performers on it. Jamie King from Sin City was there as a spoiled rich girl who didn't necessarily have a heart of gold but had her good side. There was the guy who played one of the football players on Friday Night Lights. He played George. And in playing Wade is the actor who we hope will show up as Bullseye on Disney Plus's Daredevil show, since he did such a good job setting up the character over on Netflix. Now, the more seasoned members of the cast were led by Tim Matheson. Now, my wife knew him mainly from Burn Notice as Michael Weston's mentor and later nemesis, Larry. Me, I knew him from Johnny Quest, Animal House, and my second favorite Spielberg film, 1941. Nancy Travis was there for a couple episodes. Zoe Hart's parents were played by JoBeth Williams and Gary Cole. Reginald Vell Johnson was around as sort of a Greek chorus. Charles Robinson from Night Court joined him from time to time in one of his last roles. So it was kind of varied. Now, the show is sort of a boilerplate. New York doctor has to take over practice in a small Alabama town, how she adapts, city mouse in the country, that kind of thing. Ran for 4 seasons. It was harmless enough that my wife and my mother were watching it at the same time on IMDb TV, now Freevee. And every time either one of them would click on it, it kept mixing up because they would watch them and then they'd forget who was watching what. Zoe's best friend on the show was the town mayor, a former Alabama football player who won the Super Bowl as well. Not surprisingly, he was black. He ended up having relationships with Jamie King's character as well as her best friend. Zoe's one-time crush, George, ended up dating the mayor's cousin, who also came to town. So there was quite a lot of interracial dating on the show. And the subject of race never came up once. I found it extremely refreshing that characters could just relate to one another, and the whole race thing didn't play a part in it at all. I know there had to be people going, wait a minute, it's Alabama, it really can't be like this. Well, maybe not, but real life ain't Neil Young's Alabama either, as he found out from the gym teacher from Florida. So by that standard, Rings of Power would rank very high. There was one scene in the premiere that kind of obliquely referenced the race thing, making it instead of black and white elves and men, but it honestly didn't play a major issue in the plot. Now, there was also the Make Numenor Great Again scene, and what was that, episode 3 or 4, but it was like 45 seconds in an 8-hour season. I didn't find anything else like that in the rest of the show. So going by the and just like that standard, I'd have to put Rings of Power in the 2.5 range. There was an element of guys not catching on to things, but it's part of the overall story that people were fooled by Sauron. So by default, they may not seem like the sharpest knives in the drawer. One of the main issues I think the series has that gives it the appearance of it not being top shelf is the level of actors they were able to get. Now, this is no slight to the people on the show right now, but if they got a bunch of more recognizable faces, it would lend the story more weight. The films had Ian McKellen, Kate Blanchett, Hugo Weaving, Viggo Mortensen, Sean Bean, Christopher Lee, Even younger guys like Elijah Wood and Sean Astin, they were around. You'd seen them in a lot of things. Now, a big character add for next season will be Círdan, who's a character, who's an elf, who lived all the way through from the First Age to the end of Return of the King. Supposedly he's in cast already. Will it end up being someone we know? The other thing that's feeding into the perception or reality that things are off kilter is rumors that showrunners McKay and Payne will not be fired but moved off to the side and more experienced hands will be brought in. Now, when you give a show like this to people who haven't done anything before, it's going to have some people skeptical. The question of this could fall on something we just don't know. Did the show reach Amazon's own internal metrics or didn't it? The same Nielsen discrepancy facing Rings of Power is also affecting Amazon's Thursday Night Football ratings. They're not saying Amazon's wrong, but their numbers are significantly lower. On the other hand, other non-interested parties aren't sure Nielsen is measuring it right either. So Amazon's $500 million gamble doesn't appear to be an abject disaster, but it doesn't have the earmarks of raising success either. The heavy focus in some quarters on what the cast looked like rather than what the story would be definitely rubs some people the wrong way. In trying to reach one potential audience that may have alienated another or not, it's possible those people aren't going to watch it anyway, just want to see it fail. The one sure thing that would show it's a failure is if it does not get to the 5 seasons promised by just about everyone. If they pull the plug any time before that, it would mean they were losing too much money on it. We're not there yet. Supposedly season 2 is just under production now, but may not be ready for 2023. We'll have to see how they address legitimate concerns and handle the audience expectations a little better. Calling the series more than a TV show kind of raises the bar pretty high, and I'd say as of now they haven't reached that. My advice for them when season 2 shows up, focus on how your story tells the one Tolkien didn't. Let it speak for itself now. Next time, we'll do another John Shows Us Books video, as the Fall of Numenor collection will have arrived. Probably won't have time to read it all by Thanksgiving, so we'll do a skim through and see what it covers, as well as go over the early history of the creation of Middle-earth and how the Book of Lost Tales may have been a modern fantasy classic, but the Silmarillion would have confused the daylights out of people. That's next time on Valleys of Numenor. Please hit the subscribe button if you like what you're hearing. I'm John Harter. See you on video next time. Thanks for listening.